it's not so much having the knowledge, but what you do with it. And how does that transform your life? How does it transform those around you? And how does it help with a reality shift on life? And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. So I will hand you over to John.
Yeah, Theosophy has been a lifelong journey for me, in a sense, from the cosmic aeroplane to, Ariwa here. I mentioned that I came across Theosophy in Adia at the cosmic aeroplane in Salt Lake City in Utah, and they couldn't believe that there was actually such a shop in Utah that sold books like that. So it was a good journey. But of late, my focus has been mainly on the transformative process, and for me, Theosophy represents a transformative process. For different people, it represents different things, and you'll take whatever path that you'll take that is appropriate for you at any given time. I'm going to explore today a little bit more of a scientific perspective on transformation. I was introduced to this from a talk that Tim Boyd gave at the Institute of Noetic Science in Chicago earlier this year, and through that I came across a book that was written by several of the members of the Institute of Noetic Science, and they have been doing research into transformative processes and what causes transformation in people. When I got a copy of the book, I couldn't put it down. It was absolutely fascinating what research they'd done and the things they'd unfolded. So some of what I'm talking about is from their research. So I'm going to mention bits of the research as I go on. So can everybody hear me okay? Is it all the sound working okay? Good. So the main areas I'm going to cover is, moving from knowledge to experience. Now, for many people who come to the Theosophical Society, the initial journey is about knowledge. It's about understanding different aspects of Theosophy. But knowledge only takes us so far. In fact, I've heard it said by some people that when you die, you don't take the knowledge with you. The knowledge stays with your dead brain or your lower mind or whatever. It's only the experiences that remain with you and that go back into, the Buddhists would say, into a future life, or Hindus would say a future life. So the experiential part is very essential to our whole process of unfoldment and learning. So for me now, the knowledge part has taken much of a backseat in my theosophical journey, and it's much more about how does Theosophy become live for me in my life. So, and I suggest that this is a way to look at Theosophy, not as being so much a noun, but a verb. So Theosophy is something, for me, that you do. And certainly when you read some of the texts of the founders of the modern day Theosophical Society, it's very clear that it's more about what you do than about the knowledge. For example, as Richard said, I studied at Crotona the Mahatma letters with Joy Mills back 16 years ago now. And we spent, I think, 6 weeks just exploring one letter number 18. You didn't realise there's so much in the letter, and Joy had the gift of being able to put things in context and explain much more in depth of how all this was happening. But one of the interesting things in the letters, these are letters between A.P. Sinnott, who was the editor of the Pioneer paper in India for the English-speaking people. He had some correspondence with the Mahatma that's known in the Theosophical Society as K.H. or Kutumi, and he wanted to see Kutumi, either have Kutumi materialised to him or at least see him in his sleep, and so he remembered while he was awake. And Kutumi used to say to him, and he said it quite a few times, that now if you want to actually see me, you need to stop drinking your brandy. because it's the effect of the alcohol on his consciousness that prevented him from actually seeing the Mahatma KH. But of course, A.P. Sinnett never got the picture. He didn't say right out, stop drinking and you'll see me. He just gave the hint and say, no, if you really want to see, then you need to stop drinking. And so the Mahatma letters are full of practical information like that, if you want to read it like that. That's interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about what a transformation is from a scientific perspective. What is consciousness, exploring worldviews, and how we aid the transformative experience. So I thought this was quite a good little slide. Change is inevitable. We can't avoid change. It happens to us all the time. And in the ancient texts, they do say that the only thing that you can be certain of in the world is there's change. There's constant change. Nothing ever stays static. And yet we often struggle with that change because we become used to things, we form habits, and we don't often like change. But for transformation to occur in your life, you have to make conscious choices. Transformation very rarely happens spontaneously by itself. Usually there's a cause, and to be in charge of the process is the important part. So transformation is a journey that we undertake that requires a great deal of effort. More about that as we go through this. And this is a quote from John Kabat-Zinn, who's a psychologist and leader of the mind-body medicine movement. He says that, there is a huge and rising hunger, I'll let you read it, on the part of just about everyone for authentic experience and reconnecting with what's deepest and best in ourselves in an ever-accelerating and complex world. Now, have you ever had the thought that you're here for a reason? I remember as a young teenager thinking that there must be a reason why I'm here. Something's going to happen in the world, and I'm here because I'm going to help with that change. Have you ever had thoughts like that in your lives? Yeah, so this is this sort of statement, in a sense. Many of us have a yearning to awaken, or to have a fuller understanding, or some sort of experience. And this is one of the reasons people often come to the Theosophical Society, because we profess to be able to come together and explore some of the mysteries of life. We're not saying that we have any of the answers, but we're saying we're in an environment where you can come together with fellow students and to explore and try and understand what this theosophy is really all about. So deep within us, I suggest we all have this yearning to know and to understand. And the first part of that journey is often through reading. And we'll read whatever appears of interest to us. If you're a scientific person, you'll often follow the scientific road. If you're a more mystical person, perhaps you'll follow the mystical type of writings that are around. So there's many, many ways of doing that. So what do we mean by transformation? So in this context here, I'm talking about transformation as a radical shift of your perspective of who you are. So that's a radical shift of your perspective of who you are. So in a transformative process, I suddenly see things and myself as being quite different. Now often you hear people who've had a transformative experience, they see the world differently. Some people have an experience and understanding of the unity that is talked about in Theosophy, that's applied in our first object. And they then know this, and then their whole perspective, their whole view on life changes. The way they talk, the way they communicate, and what they do actually fundamentally changes. So that's, in a sense, what we're talking about is a transformative process or perspective. It's a shift in where you direct your attention and intention. So your intention, your life changes. So you will often go through a process where what you're doing now, you'll completely leave that behind, and you'll start travelling quite a different journey in your life. A journey possibly more of service or helping others is often a mark of someone who's actually gone through that process. Like I imagine Mother Teresa, she was a nun in Calcutta, and she was part of a nunnery, or whatever you call nunneries, a monastery in Calcutta, and she had this transformative experience while walking out amongst the people in Calcutta. And at that point, she left the monastery, never to return. And the rest of her life was dedicated just to helping the people who were in suffering and in hunger in India. And her whole life immediately changed because of some sort of experience she had had. And it's an amazing example of a transformative change. It's a change in your worldview or perception of what is possible. Do you have an understanding of what a worldview means? Now, we've been exploring that in some of our courses over the last couple of years, worldview. So some of you were there, so you know it, and I think there's going to be a session on a little bit on people's experiences of that worldview later on in the convention. But a worldview is simply the way that you view the world at any particular time. So your worldview is very much governed by your education, the way you've been brought up, your social views, your religious views. And as you have these experiences, your worldview changes. It goes through fundamental changes. So a worldview is one way of explaining, where you currently are, how you see things. So a worldview is a good model to look at. And one good exercise to do is try and explore what your own worldview is, what your beliefs are, what your ideas are. I think as you go on the journey, you find that you come across challenges to your worldview. And often you know when those challenges are because you react in some way. You might reject what someone says, or you might feel offended by what something is said because it's challenging a perception that you have, which is simply just a worldview. But I suggest that when that happens to you, that there's something to look at within yourself. What is it within yourself that is being challenged by this particular worldview? Like Vic might call it a push button, for example. Something comes along and pushes your button, and the alarms go off within you. And often we won't look at it, we'll run away from it. But the whole transformative process is about not running away from it, being willing to look at that within ourselves. Transformation can be created in a moment when you see what you haven't been able to see before. So a transformation in consciousness affects a kind of double vision in people. They see more than one reality at the same time, which gives a depth to both their experience and to their response to the experience. That's a quote by Rachel Nomi Riemann. Not everyone experiences it in a moment. For some people, it's a slow process. Conscious transformations are profound internal shifts, the result in long-lasting changes in the way you experience and relate to yourself in the world. You do not become a different person. You experience a change in your perception of reality, independent of your social or cultural conditioning. So looking back in your life, can you find pivotal moments that broadened your perspective or caused a turning point in your life? There's lots of different philosophies and ideas around transformation, and there's one. I once did the Landmark Forum. I don't know if any of you have come across that before and done it before. It's quite a good experience. Apart from the American marketing, I quite enjoyed it. But in landmark forum, which is based very much on spiritual principles without calling it spiritual at all. So they stay away from any association with any spiritual connection. But part of that process, they say that each of us goes through 3 fundamental shifts in our life where our worldview radically changes. And I can't remember, I know some of you might remember, but one of them is in your early formative years, sometime before the age of 12, and I think sometimes in your late teens, and then sometimes in your mid-20s, you go through these shifts, radical shifts in perception. And generally it's based on an experience you've had in life. And they, as part of the process, they try to get us to think back, when have we had these experiences? So this is something good to look at, yourself. Think back in your life when you've had these radical shifts in perception which change the way you view the world from that particular point in time. And you'll get an idea of what transformation is about, or you get a little bit of an idea what's it about. And for me, look, I can remember 2 of them, and it's taken me probably about 10 years to do that. I haven't got to the 3rd one yet, so as we age, I think it's harder to go back and relive past experiences. But it's worth spending some time thinking on that. The Institute of Nomadic Science suggests that everybody has transformative experiences in their life. It's simply that we don't often recognise them. So that's something else to consider as part of this process. We all have transformative experiences, yet we don't always recognise them. And for some people, this process, as I said earlier, happens slowly. It can happen over months or years. So it doesn't always happen suddenly. So months and years of reflection perhaps works with some people. So conscious transformation, happens more than we think, as I've just said, and knowing more about what stimulates them can help the process. So what stimulates this transformative process? Understanding transformation helps the change process in our lives. It can be sudden or gradual. So knowing more about what stimulates this process, how they work and what supports the process can help you jump on board rather than just be pulled along, getting bashed in the process. So I'm going to go through some of the things that help the transformative process as I move on in this talk. And understanding some of these processes helps us to face the challenges that we have in life. Like, we all have challenges in life. I've told a story sometimes about a guru and all his students were complaining about how hard their life was. Their life was so hard that no one else would possibly be able to go through it. It was so hard. So he said to them all, all right, we'll write all your challenges that you're having on a bit of paper. So they all did that. He said, okay, stick them up on the notice board, all right? So they all stuck them on the notice board. He said, all right, now you go and choose one that you'd prefer to have rather than your own. They all came back with their own in the end. So don't believe that not everybody is being challenged by life. We all are very heavily challenged, and the challenge for us, I guess, is to face what is challenging us and to go through it. So this is the part of the transformative process. And very important point, your behaviour, attitudes and ways of being in the world are changed in life-affirming and lasting ways. Only when your consciousness transforms and you commit to living deeply in that transformation. When we talk about conscious transformation, that's just one word for it. Another word for it is just waking up. And I think that's a nicer word that's often used today. I like it especially because I like this quote from the Buddha. Someone once went up to the Buddha and says, well, what's the difference between you and me? Really, what's the difference between you and me? This Buddha was supposed to be this great enlightened being who knew everything, and he lived for years and years as an enlightened being and influenced a huge number of people. So what is the difference? And the Buddha said, The only difference is that I'm awake. The only difference is that I'm awake. So I had to think, okay, what does this mean? So does that mean I'm asleep? What does it mean to you? Am I asleep?
Or asleep.
Yeah, I'm asleep, definitely. So then how do you wake up? So this is what the story is about. How do we wake up from that? So by asleep, I sort of infer that means am I dreaming? Okay, is the life I'm living just a dream that I'm having? And through my studies, I've come across many philosophers, many sages, and many ancient peoples on the earth that believe that life is a dream, and that when they go to sleep, they wake up something. So, am I a dream? Are you living a dream now? Are we all living a dream? And how do we wake up from that dream? So certainly, my view of the world is not the same view as someone who's woken up is. Certainly the Buddha's view of the world was totally different to my view of the world. But how do I get to see the world from where the Buddha was standing? So this is what I understand as this awakening process, this transformative process. I want to see the world as the Buddha saw it. I'm sure you've seen this one before. What is consciousness? Your consciousness determines how you experience the world. So how much you're awake determines how you view the world. Now, how engrossed are you in your dream? So consciousness is another term for explaining your awareness. So in my research into studying consciousness mainly from an Eastern perspective is that everything is consciousness. There's nothing that isn't conscious in some form, in some degree. There's no such thing as anything dying and not being conscious anymore. Everything is conscious. And we can look at our crystals, which we love so much and we wear all the time. Why do we wear them? Because there's an energy, there's a feeling that attracts us to them. And I'd suggest that's the consciousness of that crystal, which has a particular quality. So that's a very fundamental level of consciousness. We know that our dogs and our cats are conscious. Anyone that's had a dog and a cat knows it has an awareness, self-awareness of a particular form. So the whole theory of consciousness goes along that there's nothing that isn't conscious to some degree. So we now have grown up in the school of consciousness, and some teach that our consciousness in me was once the consciousness of an animal, once the consciousness of a plant. So I've graduated to a consciousness of a human. I'm now self-conscious, but I haven't got an awareness that my consciousness is part of something greater. And some people allude to the fact that when I wake up, have my transformative experience, then I know and realize that I'm a part of one consciousness. And then my perspective shifts because I no longer see myself as separate from anybody else. And that's a bit of a wow experience. Now, looking at some of the scientific perspectives, spirituality and religious practices, like in the US, there was a general social survey conducted in 1998, which found 39% of people who had a spiritual or religious experiences that changed their life. Now that's pretty high. This in 1998, so 39% of people have had a spiritual or religious experience. Another survey done of more than 2,000 adults by the Barna Group found that over half of these sampled described their life as having been greatly transformed by their religious faith. And this is quite eye-opening, really, that over 50% of 2,000 people felt that their religious experience had changed their life in some ways. So it shows the positive power of religious experience, really. We don't often look at this side of religions, but this is one of the things we study in Theosophy. So it's not always an easy step, however. You know what it's like, have you ever researched what it's like for a caterpillar to become a butterfly? And how the caterpillar sort of turns into a mushy liquid, and then eventually out forms this amazing butterfly. That's quite a transformative process. You know, the butterfly is often used as the symbol of transformation. And they've had to go through complete physical change for their transformation. Some transformation seems to require a kind of vulnerability that accompanies loss or grief. So often these are triggers for transformation. It really gets us to look at things. I know Judy Krishnamurti's real transformation was when his brother died. He was on a ship travelling, I think, obviously from one country to another, to India, I think. And in that period, his brother died, his younger brother, and he was very close and attached to his younger brother. And he'd been told that, his younger brother would live for years and years yet, and he believed them. And I think when his brother died, this shattered a belief system within him. And it caused him to really look deeply into himself, into what he was doing. And then shortly after that experience, he made his famous speech that truth is a pathless land, which changed the course of his whole life. So this is another example of a transformative experience that came about through loss and pain. So some of these are very handy in our life, hitting the bottom, and we all hit the bottom at times, through direct experience or revelation, big dreams, psychic phenomena, seeing an apparition, sensing mystical oneness, intuitive insights of sudden knowing, usually uncontrolled, or psychedelic drugs. They can bring about the transformative effects. Just meeting a teacher. So have any of you had those sort of experiences that have changed you? Can you think back to a time in your life where you've had an experience that changed from then on the way you perceive things? I can remember having one. I was 20. I was sitting on the windowsill with a new girlfriend. We just agreed to, that night, we spent the whole night just sitting on the windowsill, looking out over Wellington from Brooklyn. And while sitting there, I had this experience that everything was perfect. Everything was absolutely perfect. I can remember, that's all I can remember of the experience, because then I started to analyse it, and the experience disappeared. So this is just a brief glimpse, and I think we all have those at different times. And they sort of act like a carrot. And it wasn't long after that I started studying the ideas that Theosophy puts forward. So, whether it came from the past or the alcohol I was drinking or what, I don't know. But certainly it was a powerful experience for me, and one I've never forgotten. Not something I usually mention, but I just mention it now because I think at different times we all have those sort of experiences. Let's move on to preparing the soil. How do we cultivate ourselves to have a transformative experience? Or can you even do that? So the moment of realization, or the aha moment, as some people call it, is the outcome of dedicated effort. Constant and daily effort is important and necessary in any individual's life. So this is a quote from Swami Nityananda. So does this ring true to you? It may not, it doesn't have to. But this is one person's perspective. And the importance that in the preparing the soil, like if you think about a garden, how do you prepare a garden? You have to nourish the soil, because if the soil isn't of good nutritional value, if the seed sprouts, then it's not going to grow. It's going to die. You have to take the weeds out. So what are the weeds? So what are the weeds in our life? So think about that. What are the weeds in our life? It's usually the things that I hang on to, distractions, habits that no longer serve us. Yeah. So think about what are the things in your life that you could weed out of your garden. So you need nutrients for the soil, you need water, light is required for us to grow something. Well, I don't know if the plant likes chocolate, but yeah, I certainly like chocolate. How do you translate moments ripe with possibility into an opening and growth? Instead of just closing down around them and waiting for the next invitation. So these moments, I suggest, come to us all the time, but we just are not able to respond because, there's something holding us back. It's our habits, it's our maybe it's our worldview, maybe it's our condition. We're not willing to look at what lies beyond. Yet deep in our heart, we know there's something there. But are we willing to trust what our heart is telling us? So often the mind gets in the way and says, oh no, this is not rational, this is silly. No, I shouldn't do this. How many of us go to work every day and hate what we're doing? No, I better not stick my hand up, But there's been times in my life where that's happened. I get up in the morning and say, I don't want to go to work. No, I've had lots of jobs over my lifetime. But you keep going because, I've got to pay the mortgage, I've got to pay this off or pay that off. And then essentially it's soul destroying. I'm not doing what I love. How many of you are doing what you really love to do? Oh, great. There's, I think 6 hands went up, 7 hands went up, 8 hands. So that's really amazing. When you love what you're doing, you're starting to go down that process. But it's hard, isn't it? Because our mind says, no, I've got to pay the mortgage off. So, then you say, well, I don't like my job, I'm going to do something else. But then how am I going to pay the mortgage off? So this struggle happens. There's no answer to the struggle. You have to sort that out yourself. That's part of the journey. Maybe you have to, be an entrepreneur and earn a bit of money quickly. I haven't got the answer. I tried that, didn't work. I found that, trying to be the entrepreneur and make lots of money, you tend to step on lots of ethical boundaries, which I wasn't happy about. So that gets thrown out the window. So cultivating transformation, as part of the process, there are basic psychological needs that need to be attended to. Now this comes from the Noetic Institute of Science, and they say that really, if you want to transform, you've got to do the whole body needs to transform. So it needs to be done on a psychological level, and as well as looking at higher needs. And you sort of, you learn about these things. Life teaches these things if you don't actually do them. Like, you've got to eat the right food for your body if you want to have the right sort of mind. I learned this in my Ayurveda as knowledge, but then it really became an experience to me when I got ill. I found that I was ill because I wasn't actually eating the right food. You need to get the right exercise in your body. So I tried that too. I said, I'll go for a walk every day. I was doing lots of walking, pounding the pavement. I felt a lot fitter, but wasn't losing any weight because I was eating the wrong food. And so, it's a bit of a slow, perhaps I'm a slow learner, but I discovered that the only way to really lose weight is to change your diet. You need the exercise too, but the exercise really just strengthens and grows your muscles. So, I've been exercising, so my muscles become stronger. And of course, muscles weighs more than fat. So when you get it in the scales, you actually don't look like you're actually losing any weight. So it's an interesting process. So all of this, you learn it through experience. You can read about it, but best, I know it now, and I'll never forget it. That, you've got to change your diet. You've got to eat the right sort of food for you. So this is all part of developing the ground, nurturing the ground before you plant the seed. So if you don't look at your physical needs, then the higher needs, it's hard for them to develop. So your higher needs are, as part of the transformative process, is about the environment you live in, for example. Are you living in an environment that's supportive of your growth? Are you living with do the family members support the process that you're trying to go through? Have you discussed this? Have you communicated this with your family so they might understand? And what are the sort of people that you hang out with? Do they support the whole process of your spiritual journey, for example? These become quite important challenges as we go on, because if they don't support it, it creates conflict within your life. And that conflict is, unless you are willing to look at it and deal with it, becomes detrimental to the whole process. So communication is really, really important as part of this process. Do you regularly engage in at least one activity that brings you uncomplicated joy? Okay, well, for 7 or 8 people in here, the work is that. So, do you do something in your life that really brings you joy? Good. Is there a regular time for creativity in your life? Like, creativity means using your right brain instead of your left brain, as biologists would say. Theosophists, I guess, would say using your lower mind or your higher mind. But the terminology today is left and right brain. So we need to spend time, if we're left brain people, in our right brain to create balance. If we're right brain people, in our left brain to create balance. Both need to be harmonised. Do you spend a daily time in quiet contemplative reflection? Now, often when we do these things, we don't see the results. Other people often do, but we don't see the results ourselves so quickly. But the results do happen. So, unless we're willing to spend the time cultivating that garden and doing these things, then the transformative process is not so easy to happen. So it's important to make time to fill at least one basic need from the higher and lower every day. And just do it slowly, and it does make the change. Now here's a quote from Zinke Hartman from 2003. He says, realization isn't something we can do. It's only something we can be ready for. So his suggestion is that you can't do anything to bring about this awakening. It is something that happens to you. Practice isn't the cause of realization, but it helps you to be more open and ready to receive what the universe has to offer. So it just cultivates the soil for the seed to grow, in other words, going back to that gardening analogy. So practice doesn't often directly bring around the transformative process. It's the work that we do within ourselves. We can cultivate the garden, we can pull out the seeds, and that's dealing with our conditioning, our perceptions in life, our things like that. And then slowly there's an awakening that occurs. Another one of the IONS surveys, 68% had formal practice or meditation and prayer. That's 68% of people who described themselves as having a transformative, life-changing experience. So 68% of those had formal practice or meditation or prayer. 73% also included reading, visualization, studying spiritual or consciousness opening topics, nature walking, music, art, and affirmations. So I thought that was quite an interesting survey. This was done by Wheaton, Chowan and Schultz in 2008. I should perhaps go back and just say that IONS, or the Institute of Noetic Science, have been doing this research for 15 or 20 years, studying people or questioning people who've had transformative experiences. And they have a definition of what they call transformative experiences, which I read out earlier. And that's what this information is based on. So that meditation and prayer was significant in 68% of those people's experiences of having transformative effects. And it's interesting. So practice. So what are the sort of practices that you think would help cultivate a transformative experience? Any suggestions?
Being still.
Being still, yeah. Creating mandalas. Oh, good, yeah.
Concentration on a specific subject.
Concentration, focused concentration on a specific subject.
Just being, living in the moment.
Yeah, being, living in the moment.
Compassion for all things.
Compassion, yep. The International Convention was about compassion. You know, it was very interesting things that some people talked about. Compassion. Yeah, compassion is very powerful. Here's some of the points that I've put down. Meditation, prayer. These aren't my points, but these are points that the IONS people suggested. Mindfulness practice, as Diane said. The AA 12-step program. Have any of you ever looked at that?
Yes.
It's quite amazing, isn't it? Labyrinth walking. Have any of you tried that? I used to think, what a joke this is, but when you try it, it's the experience is just amazing when you do it with mindfulness. It is very beautiful. Growing a garden, like lots of people, their meditation is out in the garden. And I met a lady in Adia. She must have been in her 70s. She'd been coming to Adia almost every year. She lives in southern England, south west England, and her life is her garden. She has a small garden plot about the size of half of this room, and she just thrills in the garden, and that's her meditation. Being in tune with nature.
And growing sprouts is a beautiful experience.
It is. So we can do that in our kitchen. Yep. Growing sprouts. Traditional practices and religions is, as you can see by the survey, has a major effect on transformative processes. Shamanistic practices, and some of the more modern ones, I must admit, I haven't heard about, but I've included them here. The Nice Gate Mystery School. Has anyone heard of that one?
You can have one of those at your own house then.
A nice gate. So you go through the gate into the mystery school.
Maybe you could hide it so it would be a mystery gate.
Yes, and yours all overgrown with weeds, isn't it?
Oh, now, Chris. The Course in Miracles has been quite a transformative process for many people who've studied that book. Integral transformative practices, neo-shamanistic practices, neo-paganism, these are very strong today, and holotrophic breathwork. I don't know much about holotrophic breathwork, but in my early days they talked about rebirthing and works like that, which is, it's really about using the breath as a transformative tool. And in the Eastern texts, they talk not so much about the breath as being an important tool for transformative processes, but the whole understanding about prana and how prana works in your body. And the breath is actually simply caused by the prana going in and out of your body. So the focus is often breath is used as a mechanism to come and understand the energy that's flowing in your body. But it's not the breath, it's the energy that's the important thing. So finding your practice depends on your culture, your religious, your point of view. There's no one practice that's going to suit everybody. And there's many more practices. These are just some of them. But it's finding something that helps cultivate your soul, essentially. In this age of freedom, it's easier to explore alternatives that we are attracted to and we find engaging. In fact, there's so many options out there that you can spend your whole life just exploring different options and different practices. And you get absolutely sidetracked and never actually take any of them on. It's sort of like being a tourist and going along to all these different types of practices and experiencing them, and then going on to the next one and experience them, and going on to the next one, experiencing them. But sometime in the process, I believe you've got to put your foot in the soil, and feel the garden and try it out for a while and see if it suits you. So what are the essential elements in a practice? Intention. So the intention, have real intention of what you're doing. Have attention, so it's like being mindful of every moment in your life. Repetition, apparently, is very good. And having guidance. So the intention is having the right intention of what you're trying to do. So it's a focus. You focus on what you want to do, and your intention is to accomplish what you're doing. So that's what we're talking about here. The attention is being 100% focused on what you're doing at every moment of your life. Repetition is trying it over and over again until you've mastered what you're trying to do. Many traditions see doing a practice as becoming a daily routine of some sort. But the danger comes, of course, when the daily routine becomes a habit. Like, I've sat in meditation for years and years and years and years. And I sit down early in the morning and meditate, and then suddenly I find I'm asleep because I wake up 10 minutes later. So that wasn't a meditation at all, that was just a bit of a nap. So I need to look at my meditation practice, because it wasn't a meditation that had attention devoted to it. So a meditation practice isn't much good unless you have your full attention on the process of what's going on. So the danger of repetition is it becomes habit, and when it becomes habit, then it loses its value. And guidance is important. How does guidance come to us in life today? Guidance traditionally meant having a teacher, but now who are our teachers in life today? Do you have a teacher? Yeah, indeed. Everyone's a mirror of ourselves. I guess originally books were my teachers. They were very helpful when I started. Then I started realising that my mind and heart thought a little bit differently. So I thought, well, who's the real teacher in me? My mind seemed to just confuse things. Do you ever have experiences when you go to bed and you can't sleep because your mind's going over and over and over the same thing? Yeah, really hard, isn't it? You just can't sleep, and you get tired, and you get grumpy, and you wake up the next day, and you go to bed at night again, and you go through the same cycle, the same worries even often. So I had to train myself not to worry, not to think when I sleep. So when I go to sleep now, because I've put a lot of effort into it, I just go to sleep straight away. When my head touches the pillow, I don't think, I just go to sleep. Sometimes I wake up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then my mind starts thinking. But,
You could get classes in that, John.
It's all part of the meditative process, being aware of what the mind's doing. Now,
John,
yeah,
what did you focus on to stop yourself thinking?
something I loved.
So you still think?
No, I was more or less feeling what I loved.
Okay.
Well, not quite in that sense, but in the sense I'd think of joy or happiness, or a book I read that I really enjoyed, or a TV program I watched that I really enjoyed, and those sort of things. And then eventually, didn't have to do that anymore, I just fall asleep. Yeah. So my mind doesn't distract me so easily anymore when I go to sleep. During the day, when I'm awake, the mind still is, just as tries to rule me just as much as it always does. But that's the nature of the mind. That's the way the mind works. I think it's important to recognise that this is the nature of the mind, but you don't have to be caught up in what its cycles are. But this is part of one's practice. So what comes from practice? So insight, riding the ego. I think that's quite a nice term. So the ego is no longer controlling you. You're riding your ego. Your ego becomes your tool. And healthy ego is important. Purification, living in the moment, or surrendering to the mystery of life. How hard is that? How hard was that, guys, today during a meeting? Just surrendering to what might happen. It's not easy when you're really in the middle of something and you feel strong, passionate about it, of letting it go. So this is part of the journey. I learned a lot in my early career when I was a project manager in the electrical industry doing commercial construction in Wellington. And we used to have weekly meetings about how things were going and coordinating things with each other. And people used to argue and argue, you can't do this, you can't do that. But here was me, just sat there and watched the arguments happen and didn't get involved in it. And I look back on those days and think, wow, that was amazing. And I was meditating regularly at that time, and I think the meditative practice helped me to become detached from the outcome. I still get very attached to outcomes. Don't for a second see that I don't, but every now and then I can remove myself from the outcome, and I try and do that more and more often. So we're almost at the end. So when we are doing our work, are we mindful of where we are and what we are doing, or has our mind wandered off somewhere else? So who's the mindful one here? Isn't that lovely? See, Facebook is good for some things. So we're almost at the end. So enlightenment. So what is enlightenment? It's a state. Well, there's a couple of definitions. It's a state of having knowledge or understanding. The act of giving someone knowledge or understanding. So in Buddhism, it's the awakening of ultimate truth. In Hinduism, it's a state of transcendent divine experience. So 3 definitions of enlightenment. So what does enlightenment mean to you? To me, it just means waking up. Really waking up in the sense of the Buddha. So I'm no longer dreaming, I can actually see what's real. No longer have to believe that, my truth is the right truth and your truth is the wrong truth. Because none of us actually can see or know the truth. We only see the truth from our conditioned perspective. The real truths I'm talking about here. Truths are not something that we found in books. They're something that we discover when we awaken and see the world for what it really is. So this is what I'm inferring here as part of this process. And it's certainly something I've come to believe personally, that I'll never, as John Wolsterman's, really understand truth. But as, my real self, I know the truth. And why do I look outside myself for the truth all the time? When the real truth is just locked within me, I just need to open up my heart and perceive that truth. So, for me, the transformative journey isn't a journey of the outer world, it's a journey of the inner world, the inner experience. It's a bit like the story of Parsifal. You know the story of Parsifal? He went out in search of the Holy Grail. He spent his lifetime looking for the Holy Grail everywhere in the world, and eventually came home and found that it was within him all the time. So that's the journey we're on. It's this similar story in the Christian Bible of the prodigal son, who left home, went out to seek his fortune, lost everything he had, became poor, and eventually came home to his father. So all these myths, all these stories point and tell us what it is, except we can't quite grasp the real meaning of them. So that's some of the challenge. If you want to look at myths of reality. One of the stars on the stage is, well, he's dead now, but is it David Campbell? Joseph Campbell, thanks Simon. Yeah, he did the series on myths and reality, which is six videos or 6 tapes. You can get them on YouTube. Amazing understanding of myths that person had. Really, truly amazing.
George Lucas drew upon Campbell's and
Yeah. He did, yeah. So the Star Wars, the original Star Wars, was really based on that. I haven't seen the latest yet, so don't shock me. Yeah. Okay, I'm looking forward to it sometime. So, signs of awakening. So here's just a few. Periyal Talad de Shaddan, who's a famous mystic, he said that exiled to China. Yeah, sadly. We are not human beings having spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. That's a little meditation we had this morning. So being authentic and taking off your spiritual mask, so that's the signs of awakening. Beginning to look at ourselves, our human nature, exploring who we are and why we act and react as we do. So when we react, that's a sign that we're not looking at something. Beginning to question our own assumptions and beliefs. And that's a hard one, because we're born up, we're educated through our schooling, our religion, our social world. It's very hard to actually look beyond those belief systems sometimes. Just being authentic. Letting go of fear. We can have a session on fear in itself. So the second to last slide, these are 12 symptoms of a spiritual awakening. Okay, so the first is an increased tendency to let things happen rather than to make them happen. Frequent attacks of smiling. Feeling of being connected with others and nature. Frequent overwhelming episodes of appreciation. A tendency to think and act spontaneously rather than from fears based on past experiences. An unmistakable ability to enjoy each moment. A loss of the ability to worry. A loss of interest in conflict. A loss of interest in interpreting the actions of others. I guess it's a loss of judgment in a way. A loss of interest in judging, next one, loss of interest in judging others. A loss of interest in judging yourself. Well, that's a really hard one. Apparently us Westerners are really terrible self-judging creatures. The biggest hurdle that they say we have to overcome is our own self-judgment. Stop judging ourselves. I say, I got this from Prema Chodron. Prema Chodron is the Canadian Buddhist monk. She's probably in her 70s now. Someone gave me some of her talks, and some of those talks are amazing. But the Buddhists don't believe, they find it very hard to believe how much we judge ourselves in the European world. They don't have that same issue. Something happens to them, they move on from it. But they don't dwell on it and judge themselves and put themselves down and self-flagellate themselves and so forth. Which, in the West is probably something that we inherited from, the Christian perspective on things. Judge yourself all the time. You've committed original sins and so forth. Yeah. And gaining the ability to love without expecting anything in return. Isn't that beautiful? So just, that's what happens when your garden grows. And in conclusion, once awake, everything we do has significance. Every single thing. We fill our lives even with the smallest of tasks with intention, attitude, and attention. So I leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.